Imagine if you wanted to send your family in Alaska a letter. You have an uncle, an aunt, your two cousins, and their dog. Now, if you were crazy, what you would do is write each of them separate letters, put them in separate cards, and then pay the shipping for 5 different letters. If you were smart, you would write them a bunch of letters and then try to put them all in one big envelope, then ship that envelope, and this is way more affordable because you're not wasting a bunch of extra paper. Now, this example is a little confusing, but we'll come back to it later when we explain how Rollups work to scale Ethereum. Welcome to Whiteboard Crypto, the #1 YouTube channel for crypto education, and here we explain topics of the cryptocurrency world using analogies, stories, and examples so that you can easily understand them. In this video, we are going to explain how rollups work, what the difference is between an optimistic rollup and a ZKSnark rollup, and hopefully by the end, you'll understand the benefits of this crazy, difficult to understand technology. Let's dig in. What is a rollup? I'd love to explain in simple terms, but even the Ethereum.org definition is complicated. In fact, we couldn't find one single YouTube video that explained it where we didn't yawn or have to look at code, and that's not what this channel is about. So for you to understand how rollups work, we have to explain some other things first. On the Ethereum network, there are 2 things that can be posted on the blockchain: transactions and data. Now, transactions are when you send Ethereum from one address to another. This mimics exactly how Bitcoin works and how it got started. Now, what makes Ethereum special is that you can actually store extra data on the Ethereum network. Now, this data can be anything you like. You can store "will you marry me?" or you can write a whole program in code to be run. Whenever you write an entire program to be run, that specific data is actually called a smart contract. And you can actually check out our entire video on smart contracts if you're interested in how they work, but again, this video is specifically about rollups. Now, according to the Ethereum.org website, a rollup is a solution that performs transaction execution outside of the main Ethereum chain, but then posts final transaction data on the main chain. Speaking of that, if you don't know what Layer 2 scaling solutions are for, or even what that term means, definitely check out our video on the entire topic of Layer 2 scaling solutions for a brief overview. This video is again about the specifics of rollups. So get this, first we need to know that Ethereum blocks can only hold so much data. For the purposes of this video, let's say they can only do 100 transactions. This means if there are 100,000 people who want to make transactions, Ethereum will pick the top 100 transactions that include the highest fee and then use those. Otherwise, the other transactions will have to wait. Now, those fees can start to get expensive, and so each transaction has to be important if you want to include it. Do you remember how I said you could also write data to the blockchain? So one of those 100 transactions could also be just data instead of a whole transaction. In the data, we could write a whole bunch of other transactions. In a sense, if one data entry in the block could be 10 transactions, we now have effectively scaled to 1,000 transactions per block, simply by using the data portion instead of the transaction portion. Rollups are literally rolling up a bunch of transactions and then turning them into one piece of data to submit to the blockchain, instead of a bunch of singular entries, which saves a bunch of space. And that's why we use the sending letters to your Alaskan family example in the intro. If you think back to it, I mentioned cramming a bunch of letters that were going to the same place into one big envelope. That is exactly what a rollup is. Instead of having the mail carrier do the work 5 different times, we only have them do it once. And this is what allows Ethereum to scale. Now, right now, there are actually 2 approved ways of doing this. And this is where it starts to get a little complicated. ZKSnarks and optimistic rollups are words that we heard over and over when we were researching Layer 2 scaling solutions, but at the time, we had no idea what they were. But now we do, and for the rest of this video, we are going to explain to you how each of them works. First up, we have ZKSnarks. ZK-Snark rollups, also called zero-knowledge rollups, run a computation off-chain and then submits that computation as what is called a validity proof to the Layer 1 blockchain. Now that was pretty complicated, but ZK-Snarks actually stand for Zero-Knowledge Succinct Non-Interactive Argument of Knowledge, which again means absolutely nothing if you're the target audience of this video. Let's break it down and what its purpose is, and then we can get into how it works. So validity proof basically means someone went through all the transactions in a specific rollup, did some work, which is actually very similar to how proof of work works, and then found out that they were safe and not fraudulent. Then they submitted their list of transactions and their proof to the true Ethereum Layer 1 blockchain. Now they are basically proof of working and proving that these transactions that they are submitting are true and good, but they're doing it off-chain. In a sense, Ethereum has offloaded some of its work to the ZKSnark checker, which is exactly what a Layer 2 scaling solution does. If you break it down, ZKSnarks is an acronym. Zero knowledge means that they don't actually have to see the transaction data. This is very important. Succinct means that it's short. Non-interactive for this video means that they don't have to deal with the people who verify their work. And argument of knowledge, this basically just means this is the proof that they provided that the transactions are good. Wrapping it up, some calculations have said that with a little bit of technological tweaks, ZK rollups can hit a scale that is similar to Visa transactions, which is a huge milestone in blockchain technology. Next up, we have optimistic rollups. So optimistic rollups will actually assume transactions are good and valid by default. This is why they are called optimistic, and they approve them all to the main Ethereum chain. Instead of using something called the validity proof, which is like a proof of work version for the rollup, optimistic rollups use a fraud proof, but only when they're challenged. So in short, the optimistic rollups assume everyone is telling the truth. They do not fact check and do the work like ZKSnarks do. However, what they do post is fact checkable by other people. And since Ethereum involves people's money, we can reasonably assume that there will always be people checking. That is why this works. If someone looks at an optimistic rollup and goes, hey, that transaction over there, that one looks fishy, and then they can prove that it was fraudulent, the transaction is actually reverted and then the block validator is slashed. We mentioned in our proof of stake video that slashing is a technical term which means whoever validated that block will lose some of their coins that they initially put up. One of the big things about optimistic rollups is that they can also do smart contracts and transactions involving tokens other than the Ethereum coin transactions. A downside of optimistic rollups, though, is that Vitalik himself, who's actually the creator of Ethereum, has said optimistic rollups should know that they aren't going to be optimistic rollups forever, which is basically his way of saying better alternatives may become available, but we don't have them yet. So as we end this video, we want to make it clear that this was still a pretty high-level overview of how these concepts work. Looking at the code and doing your own research will greatly improve your own understanding, but we hope that our video taught you at least something, if not, made you have more questions that you can ask in the comments below that we would love to answer. And if we can't answer them, we promise we'll do some research. Again, the main purpose of this video was to have at least some video on YouTube that briefly explains how rollups work in a way that doesn't make you yawn or have to look at code. So if we succeeded, please click the like button and consider subscribing. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. We hope that you enjoyed it. We really hope that you learned something. And most of all, we hope to see you in our next video.